and we are recording. What's up? My name's Jeremy. I guess I'm the host of this. I guess we're calling it the Fight Block podcast. Completely still a work in progress. Right now we got a microphone, a USB microphone that I've taken from Rock Band, plugged it into the laptop, and we're just gonna roll like that. So,
real professional, as you can tell.
Yeah, real pro. But yeah, we'll go right into the introductions. This is the first episode of the Fight Block. My name is Jeremy. Guess I'm kind of the host, but we'll just call it like dual co-host. Got my buddy and fellow MMA enthusiast, Matt, aka Coop. Coop, say something.
What's up, guys? Happy to be here for the first one. Hopefully the first of many. We're going to hope to keep it consistent for you. I know you've been used to us doing shows in the past, so from here on out you can expect them on a regular basis. Would love to hear feedback, as always, on the first show. So roll with the punches here and be understanding it's our first show, but hopefully it's a good one.
Yeah, so like Coop mentioned, we're trying to keep things pro here, But no, we're starting out very basic, and I've been wanting to get back. I've taken some time off from doing these videos. I started out just pretty much giving my predictions leading up to events on YouTube, and been wanting to take this thing in a little bit of a different route. And I'm looking to get into more of a weekly, consistent podcast. I'm still going to post this on YouTube, but taking this thing in a different direction. And me and Matt, we're just two fans of mixed martial arts. We're always talking about the sport, and so we figured, hey, might as well record it, see if anyone else wants to join in. This is the Fight Block, and I've given it this name because I would like to build a community of fight fans. That's really what the block stands for. A block, a community, a group of mixed martial arts fans. And so this is our first episode, and I figured it was a good time to start because really there's a lot to talk about going on in the mixed martial arts world right now, but more in particular, the whole issue with Jon Jones backing out of UFC 151 and the first UFC card ever being canceled, and just a lot to talk about, and not only about, we're going to give our thoughts on the whole falling out, and that is, I guess the relationship with Dana and Jon Jones is kind of taking a turn for the worse, but it's just a lot to talk about. And so I guess pretty much that's what our show is going to be focused on. Like I said, we're going to try and do a weekly thing and, fight predictions and reviews. But yeah, so I'm kind of rambling, so let's just get started. To recap, Jon Jones was supposed to fight Dan Henderson at UFC 151. Henderson had to pull out of the fight. Sprained his MCL, had a knee injury. Not sure how long he's going to be out for, if it's going to require any surgery or anything like that. But Henderson backed out with 8 days leading up to the fight. Henderson backed out, and Jon Jones was notified. And rather than take a fight, he decided he was going to take a step back, and he didn't want to take any stupid fights or fights he wasn't prepared for. But, I mean, really, the opponents that stepped up mostly was Chael Sonnen, who's a middleweight coming off a loss to Anderson Silva, and pretty much said he would step up light heavyweight and take on champion Jon Jones. But Jon Jones didn't want that fight. Talked with his coach, Greg Jackson. They came to the conclusion that it wasn't a fight that he was prepared to take, even though, being the pound for pound, number 3 pound for pound on most people's lists, best fighter, and really the most dominant champion, I would say, right now. Aside from, Anderson Silva's had some pretty nice performances, but Jon Jones has looked really strong. But he didn't want to take this fight with Chael Sonnen, backed out, UFC 151 canceled.
Yeah, I would say he had the strongest 2011 by far. Obviously, you have George out with an injury right now, and he was their former biggest draw. And Anderson, who is the most established of the three. I mean, George is right up there, and there's constant argument between them. But I don't think there's really any argument at all that Jones had the best 2011, and he's of the three, even though he isn't quite as established, he's probably regarded as the face of the pound-for-pound list right now. I mean, 2012 isn't quite over yet, and then you still have 2013 where George is going to return. But for right now, Jones is enjoying some nice time in the spotlight, although this kind of took a turn for the worse as far as his public image is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, getting right into it, I mean, the whole controversy right now is should have Jon Jones taken a fight, saved the card? Was it a good business decision? That's pretty much what Jon Jones was saying, was this whole his decision to not take a fight was business related. And pretty much you're talking about saving his public image. And I mean, this is a guy that's coming off of a DUI arrest. So he already had heat behind him. And now he's backing out of this fight. I mean, that's just how do you get fans to back you up? One, coming off a DUI arrest. Two, now backing out of a fight.
Yeah, this isn't really the first time that Jones had problems in the media. He always struck me as a guy who kind of didn't know what to do with his fame in the limelight. I mean, when you look at something like him saying, as early as when he first became champ, he said he was offended when fans brought him replica belts because he felt that they didn't earn them and that they looked too much like his. A guy who basically gets his paycheck in large part from the fans' interest in the sport, in a way says something that a lot of them could take offense to. So he's never really been a PR master, but he has gone basically from being likable to a likable guy who puts his foot in his mouth now and then to a straight-up, almost villain. And in a lot of ways, he's sort of replacing Tito Ortiz as the villain of the UFC, except for where Tito seemed like kind of a moron who just ran his mouth too much. Jones is starting to seem like somebody who, is almost borderline heartless.
Well, I think Tito in a sense knew he was the villain, and he played up that character. And he's one of those guys, love to be hated, and he played that up. Jon Jones, on the other hand, he wants to be a professional. He's not trying to get the heat, but he's not helping himself in any way. So pretty much, I mean, I would say just majority reaction and fallout from this is majority of the fans have an issue with Jon Jones not stepping up and taking a fight. I know a lot of fighters, especially the fighters on the card, are disappointed Jon Jones didn't take the fight because, it costed several of these undercard guys money they were expecting to be put in their pocket on that date. And, a lot of fights are having to be postponed, and it's just a tough situation for the undercard fighters. And so they definitely have reason to be upset. And, the card for the most part was weak, so it was heavily relying on Jon Jones selling pay-per-views and selling a fight. And, I guess what we'll go on to, our own personal opinions. Because, I can honestly see it both ways. And, here's how I see it. Is Jon Jones, he's definitely taking the business professional side. In a way, it could be smart. I mean, he's getting a lot of heat for backing out. But what would have happened if Jon Jones took this fight against Chael Sonnen on 8 days preparation, and somehow Chael Sonnen was able to walk in there and upset Jon Jones? I mean, Jon Jones, he's going to say, I wasn't able to prepare, and then you kind of get a weird kind of, did Chael, I mean, if he had the opportunity to properly prepare for an opponent, would the fight have gone differently? There would have been, that slim chance that Chael was, Jon Jones has dominated all his opponents thus far, past champions, made him look silly.
Natural 205ers.
And so everyone loves their fighting champions, their Chuck Liddells, guys that will just step up and fight anyone, anytime, any place. And, I guess that's not Jon Jones. And, it doesn't help his image. And
comes across as pretty selfish in the end to a lot of people. Is that the route that you were kind of the position that you were taking?
Yeah, like I said, I can see it both ways. it'd be really unfortunate for him if he went in there and he actually did lose to Chael Sonnen. And, it would put a little bit of a question mark, like, oh, well, he didn't have time to prepare for Sonnen. I mean, although Sonnen is kind of a weaker Dan Henderson, I would say. They both got the wrestling background, but Henderson definitely is more dangerous than Sonnen on the feet. And so, technically, Jones should have been able to walk in there, defend his title, save this card, and walked out champion. And, that would have, helped his reputation. But he chose to back out and not take the fight. And, I guess 151 is just never going to happen. I thought they were going to change, maybe the marketing for 152, change that to 151, but it looks like they're sticking with that. It's just going to be 152, and 151 is just going to be the card that Jon Jones killed.
Yeah, Dana White has officially gone on record, and this is a direct quote, that UFC 151 will go down as the ghost pay-per-view card which Greg Jackson and Jon Jones murdered, end quote.
Yeah, just going on a Greg Jackson little rant. Dana White didn't have two kind of words for Greg Jackson after Jones backed out. Apparently they had a little team meeting, and Jackson said that if Jones took a fight with Chael Sonnen on such short notice, it'd be the worst decision he's ever made in his career. And Dana White went on to say that Jackson was a sport killer. And, there's already controversy in that camp that, Jackson's game plans are boring and he's, killing fights with his style. But yeah. So, yeah, just a bunch of controversy around Jon Jones and whether or not he should have taken this fight. Technically, had he stepped up and fought Sonnen, I think he would have been able to handle Sonnen with ease. I think he's got some of the best wrestling in the UFC, and I think he would have been able to match Sonnen, and I think he would have been able to pick Sonnen apart on the feet, and, it would have saved his reputation a bit. But, Jon Jones is a businessman, like he says, and chose to defend his title on another day. But my thoughts are, he should have saved his image. He should have stepped up. He should have taken this fight and proved to us all why he's a fighting champion and why he should be considered one of the pound-for-pound best fighters in the world. That's just what guys like that do. And fighters are here to please the fans. This is
it's the entertainment industry at the end of the day.
Yeah, and so, Jones should have taken this fight. That's my thought. Saved his reputation. Now I can't wait for him to come out in his next fight and just hear how many people are booing him. And that'll be interesting to see because he doesn't want to be hated. He definitely doesn't want to be hated. But I have a feeling that he's going to hear quite a few boo birds when he steps out to fight Vitor Belfort at UFC 152.
Yeah, I definitely don't think he's going to be a fan favorite any longer. So would it be fair to say that the position that you're taking is that as a champion and, also one of the pound-for-pound best fighters in the sport, you have a certain additional expectation as kind of being one of the faces of the company as you're holding one of their titles, that in addition to being the best, you're also expected to make the right decision and, do what's best for your company as well? Is it fair to say that you think part of being a great champion is being willing to take risks, sort of like how, Chuck Liddell, Vanderlei Silva, guys like that, they're always regarded as being warriors for their willingness to face anyone, kind of in an unbiased fashion. They wanted to face the best, of course, but, if option A was injured, they're totally willing to face option B, even if they really had no interest in it. Is it fair to say that that's kind of the stance that you're taking on this one?
Yeah, look, if there was a clear number one contender behind Dan Henderson that was ready to step up and fight and posed a legitimate challenge to Jon Jones, and they're like, this is who we want you to fight, then yeah, I think he has a good reasoning to take a step back and, work out a game plan and prepare for the fight. I think he would deserve that if it was a legitimate contender. But UFC's got 2 middleweights that they've thrown out and offered to him. Chael Sonnen, he didn't want to take that fight. Now he's fighting Vitor Belfort, which is another middleweight that's going to be completely undersized. He's going to be outmatched with his reach. Belfort is performing well in middleweight. Arguably is one fight away from a title shot or a rematch with Anderson Silva, and he's stepping up to take on Jon Jones on short notice. I mean, Jones should walk through Belfort. I know everyone's going to be rooting for Belfort, the underdog, and with all this heat that Jones is getting, people are going to want to see him lose. But yeah, as a champion and as a possibly the pound for pound best fighter right now, arguably, he should have stepped up and taken out whoever they put in front of him.
I just kind of came up with something. I think that is an interesting parallel from which to draw, because you look at a guy like Vitor Belfort, whose record, I believe, is about 21-9, or if not, it's very close to that, which is not like an excellent record. He has a record of a guy like Randy Couture, who, he won a bit, but he lost his fair share of fights too. Because if you get famous at an early point in your career, you end up fighting the best for a long time. You see it with guys like Andrei Arlovsky and Frank Mir too. But Vitor Belfort, a lot of those fights in which he's lost have been to the top guys. In fact, all of them have, many of which were fights that he took either on injury or on short notice. And I don't think it's really a question at this point that Belfort is destined for, MMA and UFC Hall of Fame. He's their longest employed guy. I know he did a couple tours of duty in, there's Pride and then some other organizations like Affliction, but he is the only guy who is around back in the single digits first couple UFCs who's still relevant in the top 5. I think now that Tito Ortiz retired, their only other guy who can really say that's Frank Mir, and Belfort's been around longer than he has. But what would be the better legacy, I guess, is what I'm asking, in your opinion. There's Jon Jones, who is going to be remembered as a great fighter no matter what happens at this point. He's going to be famous. People are going to remember him, assuming he wins at least a couple more defenses. But he's going to be, unless something changes, remembered as the guy who was never, ever willing to take a risk. And his fights are starting to look like that too, but that's another conversation entirely. He's going to look like the guy who, always made the safe bet. Whereas you have a guy like Belfort who has more losses than Jon Jones at the end of the day, but he will always kind of be known as a great, excellent fighter and a people's champion in the fact that he was always willing to step up when the company needed him to, when the other fighters needed him to. And I'm just curious, in your opinion, let's just say it was your legacy on the line, which, reputation would you rather have precede you? That of the guy who's an excellent fighter, but maybe gets a couple more losses by the time he retires because he is willing to take those fights just for the sake of other people or so the show can go on? Or would you rather be the guy who has closer to a flawless record, but who is kind of known as being, a little bit of a sellout and a little bit of a brat who kind of only thought about himself at the end of the day? So, yeah. What do you think?
I mean, if you win fights, and you're champion, I think just, by winning, you can earn yourself a slot into the Hall of Fame. But like you said, this is about how you want to be remembered. And, this is a combat sport. This is fighting. You are going to war when you step into the octagon. And, that's what it's been from the beginning. That's what it's been about. And it's giving the fans the best fights possible. You see guys out there, like Vanderlei Silva. He loses. But every time he comes on the microphone, what he's concerned about is giving the fans a good fight. If that's what he came and he brought, and he gave the fans a good fight, he's leaving happy. In the end, that's how I think you will build the memorable legacy, is giving fans what they want. And you want to get into the Hall of Fame because fans want you there. I know there's tons of threads online on forums on who deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. And a lot of those guys, they don't have all that, they don't have the big wins, they don't have the long careers in the UFC, but they brought the memorable fights. And they were those guys, and they were the guys that, would step up and fight anyone at any time. And I really think if you want to be remembered in the UFC, it's for that and not just for your stats. And Jon Jones, with as young as he is and how many more title defenses he has ahead of him and how close he is to, really cleaning out the light heavyweight division, I mean, he needs, I think, it's more than just, defending your title and racking up the stats, especially if he continues to be as dominant as he is. People aren't going to remember his fights, and he's just going to become a stat sheet to get into the Hall of Fame. And I think, you want to become the memorable guy that puts on those fights, steps up, fights anyone, anywhere, anytime. I mean, guys like Randy Couture, Chuck Liddell, Hoist Gracie, Ken Shamrock, Dan Severn, these guys all in the Hall of Fame, and these are the guys that, will step up, fight anyone, anytime, short notice, and yeah, I think that's how you want to be remembered, especially in the UFC, is for what you give the fans, and not so much yourself.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that in this case, it's going to be pretty key for Jon Jones to establish something else other than just stats, because, I mean, to be honest with you, as impressive as Jones has looked, I'm not taking anything away from the guy, but he is really dominating the light heavyweight division at a time when, I mean, honestly, for the first time in about 10 years, light heavyweight is no longer the UFC's marquee division. In fact, it's one of the, if not the weakest. Heavyweight is just as good as it's ever been. It's better than it's ever been. You have middleweight, which is all of a sudden a place bustling with contenders. So many, in fact, that some are even spilling out up to 205. 170 is interesting. Now, instead of just George and one other contender, you have a bunch of guys vying for a shot at the title. 155, I don't really think that there's any explanation needed there. And at 145, 135, and 125, you have kind of surging guys, and there's not that many top guys at once, but there's several top guys who emerge, and some fall off, but a lot of them stay all the time. So I think, honestly, outside of 125, which has maybe half a dozen fighters in the UFC right now, so it's kind of an asterisk division in and of itself because of its new birthplace within the company. I honestly think light heavyweight may be the weakest division, with Shogun having next to no knees anymore, guys like Jackson being on the downward spiral of their career. You don't really have that many new contenders, and I mean, outside of an inevitable fight with Gustafsson, assuming he beats Shogun in his next fight, there really, other than maybe Glover Teixeira, isn't that many new faces for Jones to face.
Well, it's interesting how you say that, because I would agree with you that the division is growing slim, and part of it is Jon Jones is cleaning out the division. He's making former champions look silly. But, I was reading an article somewhere where Jon Jones was, someone asked him about cleaning out the division and what's next when that happens. And he's like, I think there's plenty of fights left in my division. I don't think I've nearly cleaned it out. I don't know where he was coming from with that, because really, aside from Gustafsson, Henderson, and I guess you can say Teixeira. I haven't really seen him fight yet. He makes his debut coming up, right? Teixeira against Rampage.
His follow-up.
And but yeah, the division is definitely slim. But Jon Jones said there's plenty of fights left. And something interesting, and going back to the whole thing about being a statistical Hall of Famer and getting in there with your stats, Jon Jones, I think, is in it to break records. And I think one of the records he's going for is to wipe out Tito's record of title defenses, successful title defenses. I think once he breaks Tito's record, then maybe he might be a little more inclined to I don't know if heavyweight division is exactly the next move for him, but I think Jones has got his eyes set on records, numbers, stats. He's a business guy, and I would rather be the fan favorite than the
guy who only had numbers matter to him at the end of the day. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. But so yeah, I guess that is our recap on Jon Jones. It is a controversial subject, and I can't rip on the guy completely because, had Chael Sonnen stepped in on 8 days' notice and somehow found a way to upset him, it'd be very disappointing for him. And I think just in general, it would have put a little bit of a strange mark on the title fight had people would have taken a step back and be like, you know what, yeah, Jon Jones, 8 days' notice. I think the fight would have been a little bit different had he prepared a certain way. But, he probably would have rolled through Sonnen and should have taken the fight, saved his reputation. That's my final word. I look forward to seeing how many people boo him and really didn't do anything to help his reputation. And, it's kind of lost a fan in me. I'll tune in. I'll watch his fights because, he is an entertaining fighter to watch. But from a fan's perspective, I'm not too big on Jones anymore.
Yeah, I can definitely see where you're coming from on that one. I think you're in the majority by far of fans who are turned off from Jones, and this is one of those things where it may be impossible to bounce back. Other guys have put their foot in their mouths and said dumb stuff. A lot of people took a while to warm up to Brock Lesnar, but I think that, a lot of people earn the respect over time, whereas Jones went to be one of those guys who earn respect for his fighting ability and then has lost it for his personality, and it's really hard to bounce back from that, especially when it led to the cancellation of an entire event. I think that it's interesting to touch upon and important to look at other factors and people that fans seem to be blaming right now. It almost plays out like a whodunit in certain ways. A lot of people are blaming Greg Jackson, as Jeremy touched on earlier, what with the sport-killing remark that Dana White made. But I don't necessarily see it that way. I think Greg Jackson, that was his advice entirely, but again, he's just the coach. He doesn't make the final call. And as a coach, is it not true that you're employed by the fighter to basically ensure that they have the highest percentage chance of winning? You're not really hired by the company at all. You're just hired by the fighter. So I actually think that Greg Jackson was just doing his job in that case, and I don't really think it's fair to call him a sport killer when he's built many of the greats. For every one fight you have, like, let's say Clay Guida against Gray Maynard, you have a fight or a fighter like Nate Marquardt, or you have a guy like Keith Jardine or George St. Pierre, all these guys who routinely get the of-the-night bonuses that Dana White hands out. So I don't really think it's fair to call Jackson's MMA, sport killing. In this case, sure, you could make a case against Greg because he was on the side of canceling the event, or pulling out of the fight, which led to the canceling of the event. But the whole fight, not really his fault. And as far as Henderson getting injured, a lot of people are kind of blaming Henderson, saying, why didn't he try to possibly let people know earlier? If you know anything about Henderson, he's actually accomplished much in wrestling on injuries, so it's just kind of his style. Do I think he could have told somebody a little bit earlier? Yeah, but at the same time, this kind of leads into another issue. I actually think that the UFC does deserve some of the blame. Not for being the ones who made the final call, but for having spread their roster potentially so thin over so many events that they didn't have a logical backup to take the fight. Although, knowing what we know now, Jon Jones may have just turned that guy down. But at the same time, I think the UFC did kind of learn a little bit of a lesson here, hopefully, albeit the hard way. But at the same time, you cannot just blame the UFC. That's like blaming the person who sold the gun to the murderer for committing the murder. They kind of provided the environment for which Jones thereby kind of killed the event indirectly. But I don't really think you can blame the UFC entirely, although I do think they deserve some of it. I do think that some of the training in MMA right now is to blame, at least for Dan Henderson's injury. I think that a lot of fighters and coaches are confusing training hard for training smart. But lastly, I have to just kind of agree with Jeremy that in large part, very significant margin, Jon Jones is to blame for this event for all the same reasons that we already talked about. And I get that there's two sides to it, but, we basically already talked about the anti-Jon Jones side. So I don't want to go on with that anymore. I kind of want to take a look at the personal side. And everybody says, okay, well, Jon Jones made a decision that's for himself. And I agree with that. And as a fighter at the end of the day, you always have the right to make that decision. I mean, to be fair, he did have the right, and I cannot fault him for that. But even that decision seems rather stupid when you look at it from a PR perspective, because even if he didn't take the risk in this fight, and a lot of people are not even calling it a risk, but he just gained so much more hatred from fans. He made huge tension between his employers and he, that I really don't think it was worth it in the long run. I mean, worst case scenario, he loses, but he comes back and just gets an instant rematch. I mean, he's been the most dominant light heavyweight champion since Chuck Liddell, so he would have got the instant rematch. And, assuming he was fully prepared for Chael Sonnen, I think he, quite easily could have beat him. With that being said, I think that people just are sick of the way that he took the safe road out of the equation. I think even for his perspective, to kind of sum it up, he made the wrong decision. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. One thought that popped in my mind when you were considering different factors that led to this whole thing with training and partially UFC's fault for not having anyone ready should something happen to their main event. Something else to blame would be how many shows the UFC is putting on, and yeah, they've added 2 more weight classes to fill shows, but I mean their schedule's increasing, and more fights are being put on, more fighters are fighting more often, and could this lead to? I mean, this is the worst year for the UFC in terms of injuries and fights being changed, and I mean, is it just coincidence that everyone's getting hurt this year, or is there really something behind? Like you said, the way they trained, or the rigorous schedule that the UFC, has increased. Now you got fights on FX, got fights on Fox, got fights on pay-per-view. There's almost, a fight every weekend. And I know that was UFC's goal, is to in a way be like the NFL and football and have something going on every weekend, and at least when the season's going on, sort of thing. But yeah, I agree. I've said my bits about Jones, and I definitely think he's going to have to figure out a way to play up the villain image. I know he was being marketed as the next big thing in the UFC, the All-American, well-spoken, but he's really done a lot in the last week to ruin that reputation, and so yeah, I've said my final bits on Jon Jones, and we'll see what happens. Looks like depending on how Henderson heals up, most likely his next fight after Belfort, should he get by him, will either be the Henderson fight or the Machida fight. It was interesting because Machida was supposed to fight Jones at 152, but he recently backed out also, and I believe he was ready to take the fight at 153, but they wanted Jones in the cage as soon as possible. So the 152 card is stacked, and I'm curious to see how the fallout from this all plays out. But I listened to the phone call when Dana White made the announcement for 151, and I was kind of surprised with his stance that he took. He's always a very blunt and open person, and he didn't hide his displeasure with Jones. Jones being one of his biggest attractions, biggest fighters, biggest draws, and he was very clear that he was unhappy and that his relationship with Jon Jones has definitely changed for the worse. And he was, I was surprised that he was, quick to bash his fighter in his camp, and he wasn't happy. And so I'm just curious how this all plays out. And but yeah, so now we got UFC 152 coming up. I believe a week, 2 weeks. I'm not sure, but Jon Jones defends his title against, surprisingly, Vitor Belfort coming up from middleweight. And, you can't count out Belfort ever with those hands that he's got. I'm sure it'd make a lot of fans happy to see Belfort connect with Bones' chin and, provide us all with one of his signature knockouts and make a lot of people cheer and happy. But, Jon Jones should take this fight with ease, in my opinion. But that's Jon Jones recap for you. I mean, Coop, any final words you have?
Well, first of all, I think that it would be a recreation of Randy Couture toppling the giant, the maniac Tim Sylvia, in one of UFC's all-time feel-good moments where the underdog overcame the kind of universally disliked champion, or David versus Goliath. I think Belfort, if he is so able to recreate that sort of same energy, he'll go from being already a fan favorite and legend to possibly the biggest fan favorite. I think at least at light heavyweight. Hopefully, regardless of the outcome of that one, Belfort kind of can regain his momentum. I'd like to see him go back down and finish what he started at middleweight. Also, do you think that win or lose, he should take any criticism for this? Will a loss here hurt Belfort at all?
No, I think, the one fighter that pops in my mind is Mike Kyle in Strikeforce, stepping up, taking heavyweight fights on short notice, but still having, a winning streak in the light heavyweight division going on. I think both are separate, and, Belfort stepping in to fight a pound-for-pound best, short notice. If he loses, I really don't think it hurts his reputation. I mean, a brutal knockout, yeah, people are going to remember it, but I think he drops back down to middleweight, and you give him a contender right where he left. So I really don't see this fight hurting Belfort's status or contention in the UFC. And like you said, I'd like to see him go back down to middleweight and see if he can work his way back to a rematch with Anderson Silva, because I know his title performance was disappointing for him and for fans, and a lot of people wouldn't mind seeing a rematch, seeing if a fight between him and Silva would go any different. But yeah, a fight with Jon Jones doesn't hurt, win or lose, or win especially. I mean, would not hurt his reputation, but lose, I really see this as a win-win situation for Belfort. It's going to help his reputation for stepping in. He's the underdog, and lose, go back to middleweight, right back in contention, I think, or deserves a contender's fight. And but I mean, if he beats Jones, that would be huge.
Yeah, and speaking of that, as far as taking damage, I mean, if it ends up being one of those fights, since Belfort does have a chin, whereas his only knockout came, at the hands of that crazy front kick from Anderson Silva that nobody, I think, ever was training for to block until that point or dodge. But, as far as opponents that Belfort could have picked, Jones actually is a pretty good one as far as taking damage from a heavier weight class. I mean, Jones absolutely has no knockout power. I know he kind of wobbled a Rashad, but those are with elbows. That has nothing to do with power. And he has ground and pound, and he does have his submissions. And I could see him TKOing Belfort from exhaustion later in the fight, or kind of grinding it away. But he's really not a flash knockout kind of guy. Belfort does have fastest hands in the sport, and I think all of us would love nothing more than for him to land a counter shot on Jones. But yeah, I totally agree. I don't think that anything in this situation can hurt Belfort, or at least it shouldn't. Fans are always quick to judge regardless. but I really don't think that should hurt his standing at middleweight. I honestly, on my personal rankings, I'm not even going to remove him from the middleweight rankings unless he decides to stay at 205, which he may have to if he wins. I think it's also interesting to note, speaking of other middleweights, I don't really think you can knock Machida or Shogun for not taking the fight at 152. I mean, Shogun, he's coming off his second war in a row. I doubt he would even be able to get medically cleared for that fight, or if so, barely. I know that there's a point which you have to wait until you can even do contact in practice. I doubt that Shogun's reached that point. Vera did put up a pretty solid fight. And Machida, too. You're talking about a guy who lost to Jones once, so, I mean, can you really blame him for not wanting to blow his one chance? If he loses again, there isn't going to be a third fight. And it's a different situation because Machida a whole card is not dependent on Machida. And I believe Machida kind of took the first Jon Jones fight on somewhat short notice because Jones is supposed to face somebody else, probably Rashad. And so, Machida has kind of proved his mettle and his worth as a warrior, as obviously has Shogun. So I don't really think there's any question of being a coward or not in those guys' eyes or being a company man. I mean, one ironic thing to point out is that Shogun lost his title in a fight where, he was coming off of, a knee surgery, one that probably changed his career for the worse forever. And he had an opponent switch very late and ended up losing to Jon Jones. So, Jones ended up winning his title in a fight where he kind of stepped in on short notice. And ironically, there is a actual easily traceable quote from Jones within the past year or so where he goes off and says that he has never refused a fight and that he never will ever refuse a fight. So it's just kind of funny how his words somehow have changed when he has the belt. It's like it's his baby and he kind of is not willing to part with it. And I know we've had champions like Tim Sylvia who in the past have claimed to, be so attached to the belt that they'll wear it while they have sex, which is A, disgusting to think about, but but B, is just kind of awkward. But Jones seems to have taken this to an equally far level, albeit less creepy. In addition to that, I think it's also interesting to note, like how you said, how Jones has really kind of fallen from a PR perspective. We've actually got word from Yahoo Sports that Jones' publicist has actually quit, which would make him the first fighter, at least mainstream fighter, in history to have his publicist quit due to him being very hard to deal with. And on top of that, the whole Rashad debacle, too, it kind of, even if Jones wasn't trying to come off as ducking Rashad, he kind of did. In addition to that, I think it's also interesting to note that, these are just kind of random tidbits that tie into the story. Frankie Edgar confirmed for us that you are the one, not your coaches or manager, at the end of the day, to make the final call on taking a fight. Jones's manager, oddly enough, was telling him that he should take the fight, but he obviously didn't listen to him. And it's also kind of laid out a path for Sonnen, who, as an admitted fan of pro wrestling himself, is able to turn the tides and go from being one of the most, interesting but hated guys at middleweight to possibly being one of the most well-liked fighters in fans' eyes at light heavyweight. Jeremy, what are your thoughts on Sonnen's pro wrestling-esque good or bad guy to good guy turn?
Well, I mean, just looking at Sonnen when he announced that he was stepping up to the light heavyweight division, rather than call it any contenders, man, the guy went straight for Jon Jones. He made his presence felt, had some choice of words, and I mean, Jones didn't help by firing back because that only is gonna it's only gonna encourage Sonnen to strike back. So by Jones responding, it didn't really help his cause, but Sonnen, I mean, he knows how to work his way into a title fight. I remember when he was calling out Silva, a lot of people were questioning the matchup and thought, Sonnen would get completely destroyed when the fight was first announced. But really, Sonnen's PR and his smack talk is what sold that fight. And but yeah, Sonnen making his presence felt, and I think you got a guy, backing out of a fight, hurting his reputation, and you got the guy saying, give me anyone, anytime, any place. It's Chael Sonnen. Fans like that. And, a lot of people don't like Sonnen, but, props, respect, and for not shying away. Sonnen says he is a fighter. He's not a mixed martial artist. He's a fighter. He comes to fight. He'll fight anyone, anywhere, anytime, any place. And that just goes back to, how do you want to be remembered? And fans love that in this sport. They love fighters. But yeah, Sonnen almost had his chance at Jones had he taken the fight. He was smart to make his presence felt in the division by going straight after the champion. But who knows? This fight could happen. Sonnen wins one or two fights, you could be right there and in contention for Jon Jones' title. And so, but yeah, that's Chael being Chael, and his smack talk almost got himself another title shot. So, but yeah, Sonnen making his presence felt definitely in the division, and a couple fights away, who knows? We could be seeing the Jones-Sonnen matchup.
Yeah, and it's interesting to point out that assuming nothing changes for Sonnen, he is going to be prepping, or hopefully already is prepping, for his fight in December, I believe, with Forrest Griffin. So he's aiming high at light heavyweight already, and I think that all of us know that Griffin really isn't what he used to be, physically, and just everybody else has kind of gotten better skill set wise. But he is a former champion, so I could see the UFC easily, assuming he can beat Griffin, trying to rush him into the title picture, especially if there's one of those situations where after the Belfort fight, assuming Jones is still champion, we're in a situation where Dan Henderson isn't quite ready from his injury, and I have heard reports that are non-confirmed at this point, but that in turning down the fight, Machida may actually have to win one more fight at light heavyweight before he's actually granted a title shot. So I could see them giving Sonnen the title shot. That remains to be seen, though. I still personally like Sonnen best at 185, but as long as Silva's champion, we're probably not going to see him go back to 185. It's kind of a situation similar to Rich Franklin, although Sonnen obviously did 10 times better than Rich Franklin did. But yeah, I'm excited for Chael at 205 regardless, and I think his good guy, bad guy personality kind of depends on his opponent. I don't know that we're necessarily going to see the good guy shtick stick around, but I'm liking it. I agree with him wholeheartedly in this case. Some of his choice quotes include saying that Nike, Jon Jones' sponsor, is going to have to change its slogan instead of "Just Do It" to "Just Do Nothing," which I personally found hilarious and relevant.
We need a best of Chael quotes to be published. Some of the stuff this guy says is hilarious, and especially a lot of stuff he said to Anderson Silva, especially when their first fight was starting up, is gold. And yet another classic comment. He's got his whole thing with Jim Rome line about calling out Lance Armstrong. You could really go on and on, but some sort of library needs to be published with the best of Chael, because the guy's got some gems.
Oh, absolutely, and I think to kind of finish off with the Chael kind of involvement in this whole thing, and also sort of like a good fitting, almost closing remark on the situation was Chael's statement on ESPN, where he kind of proceeded to bash Jones and call him a brat and a self-entitled brat in many ways. He did say some actually profound things, in that being an MMA fighter is not something you're forced to do. Being an MMA fighter and a fighter in general just makes you part of a volunteer army. So nobody has to work for UFC. Nobody is forced to go out and do what they do. And then Chael went on to say that, but if you do, and if you choose to sign your name on the dotted line and be part of the UFC and sign a contract, he believes it is your obligation to the sport, to the fans, to yourself, to fight, period. You have to fight when called upon. That's what fans, that's what your employers, that's what your peers are expecting of you. And for somebody who usually says such ridiculous things, even if they make sense, they're usually ridiculous. I found that to sit pretty well, and I think that is pretty hard to disagree with, no matter which side of the equation you're on. There seems to be two sides, and that's the I really hate Jon Jones side and the I kind of hate Jon Jones side. There's really not too much positive.
Yeah, I think those are some good closing words on the topic of Jon Jones, the now ghost card UFC 151, which will forever be remembered as the event Jon Jones killed and the event that never happened. And but yeah, so just to close out this episode, our first episode, our beta episode, our ghetto episode, one microphone. Hopefully we can work out some kinks, improve this thing, try and get two microphones going. That way it flows a little bit better. We're not, backing in and out of one microphone, and we're able to, engage each other a little bit more. But if you are still listening, thank you for tuning into the first episode. Like I said, taking this thing a different direction, and this is the first episode, so we were just kind of rambling, and we hope to organize things a little bit more. But we're just two fans, and looking to talk about fights and see where this goes. So we're going to try and keep this thing consistent and come out with an episode a week. Ideally, I'd like to work on getting this on iTunes and creating a site for it and everything, because my vision with the Fight Block is it's a community. That's what the block is. It's a group of mixed martial arts fans that like to talk about the sport, that like to follow the sport, and give their predictions, their reviews, and their opinions. And this week there was a lot to talk about. I had fun talking about Jon Jones, how much I now dislike him, and UFC needs some villains. We can't love to watch everybody, and we need to have those few guys where we root for him to get beat up. Brock Lesnar played that up really well. People tuned in to see that guy lose, and when Overeem kicked his ass, I know a lot of fans were happy to see that, to send him out of the UFC. Unfortunately, I was a Lesnar fan, and it was the other way for me. But you gotta have those guys that you love to hate. So I'll be tuning in. I know people are saying don't buy the pay-per-view because it'll put money in Jones's pocket. What happened, and he's fighting in a couple weeks, and I'm gonna be rooting for Belfort. I want to see him knock him out. So it'd be well worth the money to throw down for that pay-per-view to see that happen. So we're going to try and keep these podcasts under an hour. We're running at 53 minutes right now, so we're just in time for the closeout. But once again, my name's Jeremy. I'm going to kind of host this thing, but I'd say it's like a dual co-host thing, and we'll see where it takes us. I'd like to have people on other than just me and Matt, and see where this thing goes. So it's just a little experiment. I tested the waters with the blogging and the vlogging and YouTube and that kind of stuff. So looking to test the waters somewhere else and take this thing a different direction. So once again, thanks for tuning in. Matt, any final words?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for tuning in. And if you have any comments, there will be space for you to comment on them. Ideally, we'll be able to have some open forums with all of you lovely listeners at home. We honestly want to get your contributions the most. That's what we're seeking here, is to foster a community of MMA fans as passionate about ourselves, ones who kind of want to just take the, lighthearted but intellectual side rather than just kind of arguing about it and calling everybody dumb, which is basically what we've kind of gone away from is kind of distasteful on most other MMA sites. So we hope that you're right there with us, and that is something that you're interested in doing too. We appreciate each and all of you who have come and tuned in tonight, and by all means, if we miss something, if there's a new development on the story, if you have a different perspective, we'd love to hear about it, whether it's via email or via comment. So, yeah, go ahead and keep on tuning in, and we'll get you guys involved more and more as time goes on. It's been a pleasure, and thank you guys very much once again.
All right. Peace.